Hello, my name's Marie Gentles, and I'm one of the behaviour advisors on the Behaviour Hubs team. I will be talking to you about managing AP. Here are the intended learning outcomes on the screen, things that we will cover. So let's start with challenges specifically faced in AP. Now, education is often provided in AP on either a part-time or temporary basis before the pupil returns to mainstream school. And so often one of the biggest challenges in AP is how to cover the curriculum. Now, there is no perfect way to do this. Each and every AP does it slightly differently. One of the things that I would potentially advise is to follow the national curriculum, but at the level that that young person is at. So it's differentiated at the level that that young person is at. Now, that's just one way to do things. Many APs do it in different ways, so you do need to find a way that best suits you. But ultimately, it's about the young people being able to access the curriculum enough so that when they integrate back into the mainstream setting, they're able to continue on with that education. We need to ensure that pupils have the skills needed to successfully reintegrate back into the mainstream setting. An AP setting shouldn't be a place where young people attend just for a period of time as a type of respite. It should be a place where those young people's needs are met and their skills are developed so that upon reintegration, those skills can be transferred back into the mainstream setting. In order to effect behavioural change and improve academic achievement, we need to understand what I call ABC. We'll talk more about that later on. Attachment, behaviour as communication, and containment, which effectively means feeling emotionally safe and contained. Most pupils who attend AP have additional academic or medical needs. And again, this can be a challenge because it can be quite varied. And it's important that those needs are met, which is why multi-agency collaboration is absolutely crucial. Often staff in AP take on a huge amount on their shoulders, which is totally understandable, but we must be trying to work multi-agency as far as possible. And of course, parental engagement. One of the best ways in terms of supporting young people long term is to try and engage the family. Now, this may not always be easy, but it does need to be a priority. So how to create systematic change in AP? Now, I always start off by talking about the referral process. If we're thinking about the young people who attend AP, it's absolutely crucial that those young people are in the right setting in order for their needs to be met. What can sometimes happen is that there is a number of young people in AP and actually that provision isn't suitable to meet their needs. Now, it can take a while. I've done this personally in the local authority that I used to work in when I was head of a pupil referral unit and social, emotional, and mental health provision. I worked tirelessly with the local authority to ensure that the referral process was robust, to ensure that the young people who entered the AP were the right young people in order for us to be able to ultimately meet their needs. Now, of course, this can take a while. In some cases, it can even take years, but it's absolutely vital part of the process. It's also really important that we have close links with the mainstream schools and we have that shared vision. We shouldn't be in a position where a young person attends AP and whilst they're there, there's next to no contact with the mainstream setting. It's absolutely vital that that link, that connection is there throughout. It can be done in a number of ways. It could be, for example, review meetings. So maybe every few weeks, the mainstream school attends the AP, gets to talk to the staff within the AP, talk about what needs have been identified and how those needs are being met, but also to talk to that young person. So that young person can see that they're still part of the mainstream setting, that they haven't been forgotten, and that's where they will be integrating back into. Quality first teaching, absolutely vital, and it must be prioritised alongside behaviour for learning. What can sometimes happen is staff within AP may say it's very difficult to prioritise quality first teaching when the behaviour is such. Now, what I would advise is that if we can get that quality first teaching really tight, so we're then meeting part of these young people's needs, they're then feeling like they're able to achieve, and this has a positive impact on their behaviour. So both work hand in hand. High expectations, of course, high expectations that the young people are able to reach with support, but nevertheless, high expectations. We shouldn't be lowering the expectations for our young people in AP. Curriculum coverage, just being mindful that curriculum coverage covers our core subjects, but it also covers the emotional and social skills. All of that is part of the curriculum. So really thinking about, do we have that full coverage for the young people within AP? Now, when we're thinking about creating systematic change in AP, a staff review of their skills and area of development can be really, really useful. So thinking about how we're utilising our staff for that distributed leadership. So what skills do our support staff have? What accountability can they have within the provision, within the hierarchy of senior leader, middle leader, etc. But what accountability can each staff member have so they feel part of and not done to when we're thinking about creating this systematic change in AP? Systems monitoring, so that consistent monitoring of systems and processes, looking at what's working. Are we tracking the right data? Are we not just collating data for the sake of it? What are we doing with it? And so on and so forth. And of course, parental and pupil voice and engagement. So again, are we really hearing the pupil voice and the parent voice? It doesn't mean that we're going to be able to do everything that a young person wants us to do, or even a parent wants us to do, but it does mean that they need to feel that they're being heard, their voice is being heard, and we are in some way acting upon that. This is a really crucial part, actually, when we're creating systematic change in AP, that we are really listening to what the young people are saying and why. Staff buy-in, I already talked a little bit about how important it is for staff to feel like they're part of and not done to. So again, when staff have some accountability, when they understand that shared vision, but also why, I'm going to say this a lot throughout, why we're doing what we're doing is often the key for that staff buy-in. And the embedded ABC, so the attachment, behaviour as communication, and containment, that feeling of emotional safety. So how to use staff when managing AP? So support staff should be supporting young people both academically and with their behaviour. Often it can be quite heavy in terms of the behaviour side of things, which is understandable, but we need to be able to balance that out if we're going to effectively manage the AP. So do we have our support staff confident? Have we potentially done a review of their skill set so they're able to support both academic and behaviour? Robust CPD is an absolute must, and really thinking about that live CPD. So how often is that CPD outside of the annual CPD that we have? Is it daily? Is it weekly? How are we sharing our practices? If we have staff members, for example, if we have daily briefings during a daily briefing and they're talking about a young person, potentially an incident that has occurred, how are we utilising that CPD in that exchange? Are we saying things like, yes, we understand that's what's happened, so let's have a think about what they could have been communicating via their behaviour. Let's have a think about their attachment style. Why do we think this occurred? What was the trigger? Where did this come from? Let's take a few steps back and have a look at that. And then facing it from that point of view, and then being able to look at the resolution, which is totally entrenched within that CPD. So making that live CPD, things like the language, etc. Staff to embody and model positive behaviours, that includes senior leaders. So if we're asking our staff to do something or not to do something, as senior leaders, are we also modelling that to our staff, who are then modelling that to the young people within the AP? So I always talk about the fact that I don't ask staff to do anything that I haven't done or I wouldn't do myself. And again, if we are asking things of staff and we want that buy-in and that shared accountability, it's really important that we're able to model that to them. And I've just mentioned a little bit there, the staff voice for monitoring and evaluation, and that buy-in via that shared accountability, that we're all accountable. Yes, we have our senior leaders, etc., and our support staff and teachers, but we are all accountable because we all buy into that shared vision. Exemplary AP leadership, so having a think about that daily visibility and accessibility. Often when I talk about daily visibility and accessibility, one of the things that people may bring up, they may say, oh, it's very difficult, for example, to get my staff to be on the front gate every single morning because they're setting up their classrooms, there's limited time and availability. And what I always say is have a contingency plan. Think about if that staff member is not able to do that, who is the backup? Because that beginning of the day, having someone on the door, for example, that visibility, if possible, someone in SLT can really set not only the young people up for the day, but also the staff as well. And just thinking about if you, we're going to talk a bit about that regular CPD again in a moment, but really thinking about, do our staff understand the impact, literally the scientific mechanics of what happens to the brain when a young person sees a staff member on the front door and they smile at them when they walk in the morning. It's not just about be smile and be happy with the young people, but do we really understand what that does for the young people, what it does to their brain, how it makes them feel, and so on and so forth. Do or have done what is requested of the staff team. So absolutely vital, as I've already mentioned, as a leader, that whatever we're requesting of that staff team, we have done it or we are doing it ourselves. So we are modelling it to our staff. Staff containment, so that feeling of emotional safety for the staff, which can also be entrenched in that continued personal and professional support. So we are not doing it for our staff members, but we are overseeing it. We are talking to our staff about what are you doing to look after you. This may have nothing to do with things within school. This could have things to do with outside of school. So what are you doing before school, after school, just outside of this environment to ensure that you're taking care of you, that you are emotionally contained so that you can be the container for the young people in our care. High expectations and levels of trust, of course, is very important, exactly the same as it would be for the young people. It needs to be the same for the staff members. So do staff understand why we have the expectations that we have, just like we would model for the young people? Do they understand why, how to achieve them, and have that level of trust built into that? And do staff also understand what that looks like if those expectations aren't achieved as well? That shared vision, I keep saying it, that shared vision that is effectively communicated and understood, but most importantly, lived by everybody. So if we have that shared vision, if a visitor visited your provision, would they be able to walk in and really feel what that shared vision is? Would they hear common language as they walked around your provision? Could they really understand what that shared vision is within your provision outside of seeing it on a piece of paper or on the website? And this is what helps to create that safe and calm environment. I'm going to keep saying about regular CPD, absolutely that live, lived CPD is absolutely crucial in AP. Do your staff understand what behaviour as communication means? Or are they taking everything really personally, which is understandable. That can happen. It can be very difficult. But do they understand behaviour as communication? Do they understand the attachment theory, for example? So they're able to separate. I talk about separating the young people from their behaviour, which means can they see the young people for who they truly are and understand that the behaviour is a communication of need and not a personal attack on them? And of course, consistency. So understanding that, of course, things go in waves, and when we're implementing things or we're advocating for consistency, sometimes there is pushback, but it's the understanding that we continue on and ensure that we have a consistency right across the board. So what comes with a pupil joining AP? So there's a number of bullet points here on the screen, or I won't read through every one here, all very, very, very common for young people joining AP. So I'll pick out the second from last, the attachment needs. This is why I talked earlier on about, do your staff understand the attachment theory? Because 99% of young people joining AP, it's most likely that they will have an insecure attachment. So do the staff understand what that looks like, how that presents, how that manifests as undesirable behaviours, and then what they can do to support those young people? So here is a reflective activity that you can do with your staff team, with your senior leadership team, and it's just to start thinking about those systems, policies, practices that you have in place that effectively support the needs of young people, because ultimately that's what it's all about. Young people presenting with undesirable behaviours have unmet needs that need to be either identified or met or met. And so what's important is that when we're managing AP, that our entire, all our systems and all our policies, the entire structure is set up to support and meet those needs of the young people. So have a think for your staff team. What are the areas of strengths in terms of the fact that you feel that, yes, actually our provision does support these needs, but also where are your areas of development? Do we feel that we need some more CPD in one area or the next? Do we feel that we need to model what we expect to see a little bit more, and so on and so forth? So thinking about reintegration is absolutely crucial when young people join AP. And of course, it needs to be thought about prior to that young person joining AP. In fact, the entire provision should be set up with an emphasis and a focus on reintegration. So do young people, the mainstream setting, families, parents, etc., know and understand that we are attending the AP for a period of time, and our aim, our goal, is to reintegrate back within the mainstream setting. So some factors that affect reintegration are, I've said it already, understanding behaviour as communication. If staff members within the mainstream setting and all the AP don't understand the behaviour as a communication and not a personal attack on them, it can be very, very difficult for that young person to integrate back. So for example, what does anxiety look like on some of these young people? It can actually look quite aggressive, for example, and it's about understanding that that can be communicated via their behaviour. Yes, young people can develop the skills to eventually be able to say and communicate verbally how they're feeling, regardless of age. But ultimately, what we'll often see, especially initially within the AP, when managing AP, is that behaviour is that communication. And so it's so crucial that everyone, all the adults supporting the young people, understand the specific behaviours as communication for specific young people, and then how to meet those needs. It's so vital that we're thinking about the timing and the length of the reintegration. Often what can happen is we can potentially think about extending reintegration periods, and there's nothing wrong with that if that's, a necessity. But ultimately, there's always going to be a part of that reintegration that feels a bit wobbly as that young person resettles back into the mainstream setting. So it's very, very important that we are consistent and we have a clear plan with the timing and the length of reintegration. So we shouldn't really, I wouldn't advise to integrate, for example, around Christmas time, when sometimes things go off schedule a little bit, or before the summer holidays. So really thinking about the best time within the academic year, but also about the length of that reintegration. Thinking about the access to the curriculum. So again, as I spoke about earlier, thinking about if we are when we're managing our AP, if we're really thinking about the curriculum, potentially working just alongside the national curriculum, but at the level that that young person is at, it means that then when they integrate back into mainstream, they may be able to, it may be slightly easier for them to then continue to access the curriculum, but also thinking about, interventions, when we're talking about identifying their needs, that also, of course, is their academic needs. Parental engagement is absolutely crucial when thinking about integration. Do the parents feel that they understand what this looks like? Do they feel empowered? Do they feel that they understand what their role is in supporting the reintegration as well? Attachments, cannot stress this enough. One of the most important factors of a successful reintegration is attachment at both ends. So that will be within the AP setting, but also within the mainstream setting. Who are the key adults? And I don't mean the key adults who are in charge of the reintegration process, or who have a title which means that this is their job to, liaise with the mainstream school or whatever that may be. I'm talking about secure attachments. So a young person who has a secure attachment with an adult who they feel emotionally safe with. This is absolutely vital for a successful reintegration. So who is that person that is going to talk to them about that integration, potentially support them whilst integrating? And who is that person within the mainstream setting who is going to then receive them, so that feeling of emotional safety can be transferred? I cannot stress this enough. This is almost the foundation for the successful reintegration. If we can have that, then the timing, the length, the curriculum, all of those other elements are then built on top of that. If a young person does not feel emotionally safe and secure, it's going to be very, very difficult for them to reintegrate. School support, of course, that speaks for itself, but what additional support does that young person need? Of course, when managing AP, it is a significant way to be able to identify young people's needs and meet those needs, but needs are needs, and they're going to continue to have those needs when they integrate back into the mainstream school. They don't disappear, aren't fixed, etc. So it's about how are those needs going to continue to be met upon reintegration. And of course, pupil history. All staff supporting the young people within AP and within the mainstream setting, do they understand the history of that young person? Do they understand their needs, not beyond potentially a diagnosis on a piece of paper? Do they understand how that presents, what that means? If there's a diagnosis of ADHD, for example, do staff really understand what then that young person needs to be able to successfully reintegrate? So how to achieve reintegration success? So thinking about when managing AP, setting up the provision as a model that supports transition back into the mainstream sector. One of the things that I used to do when I was head of my alternative provision was we celebrated reintegration. So young people knew before they even came in to our provision that we are here, we will support you, you'll build secure attachments, but we are all gearing and aiming towards you integrating back into mainstream school. And this was set up right from the beginning. We had massive celebrations when young people reintegrated. And so the entire provision was set up as a model that supports transition back into mainstream school, which is inclusive of mainstream staff members coming to the provision on a regular basis to see the young person thriving within the mainstream, to see what that looks like, to speak to staff to understand what their needs are, how they present, and how they're then met, but also to see that young person and to continue and secure that attachment to support successful reintegration. Systems should be transferable and achievable within the mainstream setting. So again, really thinking about the basis. So all settings, mainstream, AP, should have, and we'll talk more about this, they should have clear boundaries, clear expectations, consistent language, the attachment with the adults. That should be right across the board. However, how it looks within the different settings may differ. So how the boundaries or expectations look within the AP setting may look different from how it looks within the mainstream setting, but there are still boundaries and there are still expectations. And we'll talk a bit more about that as we move through. And then consider transition support. So what does that transition look like beyond a planned length of transition and beyond that timing of that transition? What does that actually look like for younger children, or it could even be for some of the older young people as well? Do we need transition objects that support that young person to feel safe and secure? Or are we supporting them to transition with the adult that they have a secure attachment with? What does that look like? And so on and so forth. So it's very, very important that all those things are meticulously planned. Thinking about applying those systems consistently within the AP. So whatever systems and practices that we have within our AP, that are absolutely consistent. So when sharing what's working for these young people with the mainstream setting, we can talk about the importance of consistency. We can talk about shared systems and practices that, again, may look different within the different settings, but they're still there. So we've still got the expectations, still got the boundaries, the common language, and so on and so forth, the attachment. High quality CPD, we're going to keep saying it because it's absolutely vital. So do staff within the mainstream setting and within the AP setting understand behaviour as communication? Do they truly understand what that looks like? Attachment, so on and so forth. I said it quite a few times already, but it's because it's so important. If staff members don't have a deep understanding, it can be very, very easy to take things personally or react to the surface behaviour. And what we're trying to do is be more preventative than reactive. So what we want is to have skills and strategies and support systems that support young people, firstly, so that their needs are being met. And then when their needs are being met, that will significantly reduce the risk of undesirable behaviours reoccurring in the same way. So, of course, we need to equip the staff then to support both learning and behaviour. So really thinking about, especially our LSAs, some amazing support assistants, but how they also supporting the young people's learning as well as their behaviour, and how confident do they feel, do they need extra support, and so on and so forth. Thinking about recruitment as well, which is absolutely crucial to reintegration success. So when we are recruiting, what are we looking for? All the things that I've said so far, do we have those things, embedded within questions when recruiting new staff members? And of course, again, going back to the multidisciplinary team collaboration is absolutely vital. What does that look like? In order for young people's needs to be met, we need to know not only what the needs are, but we need specialist professionals to be able to liaise with, so that they're able to identify and liaise with ourselves to say, this is the best way to meet these needs. We need to go beyond the understanding of, I'll use my ADHD example again, that we know this young person's ADHD, but we need to go deeper. What does that mean? What does that look like? How does that present for the young person? So what their needs, and then how do we meet those needs so that the undesirable behaviours, the risk of high-level undesirable behaviours is significantly reduced. So we're being preventative rather than reactive, rather than what do I do when this young person does this? So instead we're doing, what do we do to reduce the risk of that occurring in the same way? So I did say that we'll touch on this in a bit more detail, that balance of academic and behaviour progress, which is absolutely vital because it's equally important in that young person's development. And again, thinking about, do staff members truly understand the importance of the balance of both? Of course, they benefit from accessing the curriculum, as do their mainstream peers, and they should have that support and intervention where necessary. So what are their needs academically? Do we have interventions within our AP intervention to meet those needs? A pupil's identity may be in crisis when they arrive in AP, and anxiety can be high. So again, do we really understand about anxiety, and are we ensuring that our AP is set up to meet those anxiety needs? So is there staff who understand about anxiety, about attachment, and how to create secure attachments with young people, what that looks like, the consistency within that to then soothe the anxiety? Do the adults within your provision understand that they need to be the emotional container for the young people? Do they understand what that means? And if not, it's fine. It just may mean that there needs to be some more CPD around it. So in order to be an efficient container, emotional container for young people to soothe anxiety and reduce stress, the adult needs to be able to regulate themselves in order to co-regulate with the young people. And do our staff know and understand all the science behind it? So when we're thinking about the brain, for example, when a young person is in crisis, high anxiety, feeling dysregulated, the best way for them to be able to learn to self-regulate is to co-regulate with an adult. And the best way that they co-regulate with an adult is if the adult is able to regulate themselves. Confidence and resilience needs can be met via academic achievement. So again, this is where that balance comes in again. So we're wanting young people to present with more desirable behaviours, which are linked directly into that confidence and that resilience. But this can be met via their academic achievement. They need to feel that they can. They need to feel that expectations aren't lowered. They are at they're at the right height, if you like, but they've got support to be able to reach those expectations. At all ages, primary, secondary, young people in AP can feel that they're very different from their peers. So it's absolutely vital that we are, of course, understanding what those differences are and meeting those needs, but we're not focusing heavily on the behaviour and not focusing on those academic needs, which will ultimately build their confidence. The more different they feel, the more they strive to meet that persona's needs, which usually happens in undesirable ways. So again, if we can balance that out, if we can get them to feel like they can do and that they are able to achieve, it helps to balance that out. And of course, I said this already a number of times, but it's vital that we maintain those high expectations within that contained framework, within our systems and practices. And this in and of itself will help to reduce anxiety. I'll talk more about how we can do this shortly. AP should not be just managing behaviour or just looking after young people for the day. They should be meeting these young people's needs. And that will then lead to the behaviour being modified over time. So I talked earlier about the ABC, and this is just a model of it. And it's a really good way to talk to staff about kind of all of the factors incorporated into ABC, because it's easy to remember: attachment, behaviours, communication, and containment. So let's have a deeper look at containment. So containment, that internal feeling of emotional safety. If a young person does not feel emotionally safe and contained, you can have the best reward system, the best consequence system, but ultimately that young person will find it very, very difficult to be able to be successful within the AP if they do not feel emotionally safe and contained. So pupils with highly challenging behaviour often have insecure attachments, really high levels of anxiety, and so on and so forth. So as I talked about not too long ago, it is crucial that the adults understand all of these elements via some CPD, and they are able to then be the container, the emotional container for the young people, so that they can then co-regulate with them on a day-to-day, moment-to-moment basis. And in order to be an effective container, an adult needs to understand behaviours, communication, and this then, of course, then relieves the anxiety for young people over time and helps with their self-regulation. A young person's brain, from a very young age, cannot self-regulate without the co-regulation of an adult. Thinking about the fact that the part of the adult's job, of course, is keeping that young person not just physically safe, but emotionally safe. And this, of course, then supports that emotional resilience. So physical containment. So physical containment means securing someone when they're feeling insecure and boundless. This does not always mean physical as in, hands-on a young person, a hug, etc. It doesn't always mean that. It can mean the space that a young person is in. So literally, when we're thinking about managing AP, literally the building that the young people enter. What does the building look like? How welcoming is it? Now, these sound like all very, basic, obvious things, but this all leads to physical containment internally for young people. So as soon as they step through the door, there should be that feeling of familiarity. Is there someone on the door to meet them? So immediately their nervous system starts to regulate as soon as they step foot throughout the door. Even thinking about when I was head of my provision and we were lucky enough to move to a new building, even thinking about things like the colour of the carpet, thinking about colours that calm the brain, thinking about the number of displays and things we have on the wall. Are they overstimulated, understimulated? All of these things link and have an impact on a young person's internal feeling of emotional safety. Of course, physical touch should only be used if a pupil becomes a danger to themselves or someone else. And we've got a number of things, of course, that we have to consider should we be in a restraint situation. And of course, staff should be trained. There's a number of positive handling training courses out there, but it also should be a last resort. Always refer and adhere to the school policies and procedures. And emotional containment means that listening and understanding of a young person's problems or just their voice. And again, it sounds like a very light thing to do. And when we're thinking about managing AP, we're thinking about the systems and the structures. But part of those systems and structures being able to adequately support the young people means emotional containment. I'm going to say it again, if a young person does not feel emotionally safe and contained, the systems and the structures are wonderful, but it can just be harder for that young person to adhere to it all. You may not say anything to help solve a problem. Again, this is this idea of co-regulation and understanding scientifically via CPD, understanding what this does to a young person's brain. We've looked at containment in two parts, the emotional and the physical containment. And again, it can be a way that staff members look at it as well, but ultimately they interlink and overlap with each other. So remembering that physical containment can literally be the space that a young person's in. Also thinking about things with physical containment as well, which obviously interlinks with emotional containment. If a young person's really struggling with an outdoor space, you might have a really big, wonderful, lovely outdoor space, but young people are really struggling. You may want to consider that actually they don't feel that physically contained in a larger space. And actually within the smaller spaces, they feel more emotionally safe and contained. So again, all of these things can come via CPD and things to consider. And both emotional and physical containment describe the process of helping a person to contain their own anxiety and emotions so that they do not feel overwhelmed by these feelings, which ultimately leads to undesirable behaviours. So if we're able to significantly reduce the risk of that occurring, the young people then have the capacity to think about the situation and then self-regulate. So ultimately, if we think about the basis of why we have undesirable behaviours, it will be because it starts with young people not feeling emotionally contained for one way, shape or form. Maybe their needs aren't being fully met and so on and so. There's a number of reasons, but ultimately, if we're able to understand about emotional and physical containment and begin to co-regulate to support young people to self-regulate, it then gives them the capacity to be able to think about situations and modify their behaviour over time. So this is the bit that I said we would talk about in a bit more detail in regards to structures and systems. So this may be a way that you would like to think about how you can look at different areas of structures and systems within your AP and share with staff. So this is what I call the containment puzzle. So it's all about that internal feeling of emotional safety and containment that I keep talking about as the foundation, but it's embedded within the systems and structures, within the external systems and structures. And there's 7 containment elements here on the screen. So let's take a look at each of them. So the first, the importance of consequences, or, you don't have to use the word consequence. Everyone's got different words they like to use, or you can use effect as in cause and effect, whatever suits yourself. But it's really important, of course, that consequences, they are a part of life. The reason I say maybe cause and effect is it can be another way to talk to young people about why consequences are in place. Because of course they need to understand that cause and effect, so they're able to participate in society. Now, we all know that behaviour management is that vital part of that pupil's development, and of course will have a significant impact on their worldview as they grow. Adults working with the young people must place reasonable boundaries on their behaviour. So again, thinking about not having consequences to be reactive to behaviours. What we're doing is we're trying to be preventative, but of course, working with young people, it's going to take a while to develop. So really important that the consequences, the effects that we have, are they supporting that young person to modify their behaviour? Is it teaching them something? Are we using consequences as a teaching and learning opportunity rather than just simply a punishment? I often hear people talking about, we have these same young people, whatever the consequence is in this, this room or whatever that consequence is, every single day, day in, day out. And I'll often say, it's okay, but maybe we need to think about, are those consequences then working? Are we just being reactive? Because a consequence should be a teaching and learning opportunity for both the adult supporting the young person and, of course, for that young person to learn and do something different the next time. And this then, in turn, then reduces that anxiety by containing that young person. Young people need to know what the cause and effect is prior to it happening. So is that very, very clear within the AP with staff and young people? It shouldn't, depending on how the adult feels in the situation, it shouldn't then change. I'm really annoyed with you. So instead of, I'm going to make something up, instead of you getting 2 points, you're going to get 4. If it's 2 points, then it has to be 2 points, regardless on how the adult feels. And what will eventually happen over time is that young person will begin to internalize that and expect, I've done this, this is what happens. I've done this, this is what happens. And actually, if they don't get that, it can often be very unsettling for them. And then they can feel very dysregulated, even if they're not happy to get a consequence. They need to understand when this happens, this is the consequence, or this is the effect. So talking about routine, so I talked about the external structure, so that's the routines, and what it provides internally for young people is the emotional certainty. So external routines, internal emotional certainty. So of course, routine should be predictable for young people, and be prepared for any changes where possible. And again, do staff really understand the reasoning behind it? Do staff really understand that for these young people with various needs, the routines help them root that young person in the now moment? When a young person knows what's coming next, they're more able to focus on what's happening now. When a young person feels uncertain about what's coming next, it's very difficult to focus in the present, to listen to the teacher, to do the work, to be able to respond, so on and so forth. So do we have that deeper understanding of why routines are so important for these young people? Transitional support should be considered where necessary in routine. So again, wonderful to have that structure, after this lesson we go to break, but how do they transition from that lesson to break? So do we have almost a mini routine within the routines that create that emotional certainty for these young people? Grounding techniques that can support both transitions and changes to routines. So again, for young people of all ages, when they get to within a routine, if they're moving from a classroom to the dining hall, for example, when they get to the dining hall, what's a grounding technique to help them feel contained, emotionally and physically contained within that space? So, and that could just be something as simple as when we get there, we all sit down and then, I don't know, we listen to what the adult has to say, or you wait till your name's called to go up for your lunch, or whatever it may be. So it's like routines within the routine that helps to ground them. When they enter the classroom, what's the grounding technique? Do we all stand behind our chairs and wait for the teachers to sit down? Or do we start with a hook activity on the board? And so all of these things help provide that internal emotional certainty for young people. And they, of course, help to then secure the attachments, because they begin to trust the adults that this is what we do with these adults, and that helps to reduce the anxiety. And of course, it supports the internalization of restraints for the young people over time. Language, another element that was in the containment puzzle. So the external element is language. It provides internal emotional support for young people. So again, do our staff truly understand the importance of why we talk about language being so important? And of course, how we say what we say has the most impact. It's fine and wonderful if you have scripts within your provisions, that's fine. It may support the staff, help to scaffold things a little bit. But do staff understand, as we talked about earlier, the importance of the fact that they are the container. So they need to be supporting themselves, their own emotional well-being. That are they regulated, so that when they're saying what they say, if it's a script, for example, the young person is picking up not only on what they're saying, but how they're being. I have a saying where I say young people always pick up more what they see from you than what they hear from you. And then another saying I have is, so be what you want to see. So if you want to see a young person who is regulated, you as the adult need to be regulated, so that when you're talking to them, that language, they're picking up on not just what you're saying, but how you're saying it. So important. Of course, specific language can help to reduce fear and anxiety. So if you do have scripts or consistent language across the school, that's fine. And separating, I said this a bit earlier, separating young people from their behaviour allows them space to avoid becoming emotionally full again and then becoming dysregulated again. So that then means, maybe language around, I really, didn't like this particular behaviour, be very specific. I really didn't like it when you, be very specific with the behaviour that was undesirable for the young people. And then via the adult's language, we can say to young people that you as a person are great because, and then being very specific, maybe about their characteristics. You know, I know that you are, and then talk about how they are as a person. So these are things that you're going to have to think about, or staff will have to think about prior. So when you're on the spot, you're not trying to think of it all on the spot. It can be strange if you choose to do it when you first do it, but it is so powerful, because often children and young people believe that they are their behaviour. They believe I am horrible and I am naughty and I am not nice. And then they just become who they believe they are. Well, this is who I am. When we can separate it and we can say to them, no, that behaviour was undesirable, but you are great. It helps them not only to be able to regulate, but it also helps them to do things like accept if they've got a consequence or effect. It helps with the attachments and so on and so forth. Using the language of choice, you may choose to do, very powerful one. Again, it's just giving young people two choices, making sure that those two choices you are happy with. So if they choose one over the other, you're not thinking, oh my gosh, why did they choose that one? So giving them two choices that you're happy with, it just gives them an element of safe control. And we can use it with many, many small things as well as larger things. In fact, it's good to practice with smaller things if you and your staff aren't used to using it. So this might not be appropriate for all settings, but would you like to sit here or here? For younger children, would you like to sit on the blue spot on the mat or the red spot on the mat? If that's not appropriate, if you want them to be consistent and sit in the same place all the time, that's fine. It's just an example. Do you want to go and show your work to Mr. or Mrs. So-and-so with this child or this child, and so on and so forth. So it's just about providing young people with choice so they feel they have some control, but it's safe control. And then, of course, specific praise so that that young person knows how to recreate the moment. So again, lots of the things that many would have done on teacher training, you know, not just well done, that's good, etc. Being very specific, but even more so with these young people within AP, because often it can be missed for them. Often if we're like, well done, they're like, what part is well done? Because often, this is why I talked about separating the young people from their behaviour. They believe that's who they are. I'm not a very nice person. So when we say well done, well, what's well done? So being very specific on what we are praising them for, so they know how to recreate that feeling for them, that internal feeling it gives them, that recreate that moment again. So an external factor, structure, boundaries, talked about that quite a bit. But the reason why boundaries are so important is because of the internal emotional safety that it provides. So generally, of course, the more a young person pushes a boundary, the more they're seeking that emotional safety. They will test and they'll retest again to ensure that it is safe. Are you safe? Is this adult safe? Is this school safe? Is this provision safe? And so in order to test that initially, they may test that in undesirable ways. And they need to see and also then feel, yes, it is safe because, when I do this, this happens. So going back to consequence and effect. Yep, when I do this, this happens. Not when I do this, if the adult's emotional, something different happens. But when I do this, this happens consistently all the time, for example. Boundaries must be clear and remain the same from adult to adult. Adult and pupil interaction. The adult must be the container. When we're thinking about that feeling of internal emotional safety for the young people, we're going to say it again, in order for an adult to be an effective emotional container, they've got to be able to regulate themselves. Absolutely crucial. Within an adult-student relationship, the student should never be the container or never try to be, and it should never be equal. The adult always needs to be the container. Boundaries help young people to understand and respect their own needs as well as the needs of others, and also provide that sense of emotional security, which we've talked about a lot, which helps them to self-regulate. Another external factor, expectations, and that provides internal emotional security for young people. So that's why we have them. So internally, young people only go as high as the expectation we set for them. But of course, they have to be attainable and they need to be supported to be able to meet the expectation. Fantastic to have high expectations, but do they know how to meet them? Sounds really simple, but we can be explicit. We can say to young people, whether that's academically or in regards to their behaviour, we can set the expectation and be really explicit in how they meet that expectation. So it's really, really clear to them. Often we set expectations and just we say to them, this is what I expect of you, or you know what the expectation is, and the young people, but they don't know how to get there. Self-esteem and confidence, of course, are tightly connected to expectations. And in order for behaviour to be modified, pupils need to know how to reach an expectation. And that demonstrates care from adult to student. And the benefits of rewards, which is the other thing within our containment puzzle. So awards should be based upon the school culture. So again, thinking about what is our school culture? What is our shared vision? And can we base the rewards upon that? So if we have a culture of, in this school, we are a community and we do something really basic, we're sharing, we're kind to each other, then the reward can be based upon that. When we see a young person sharing and being kind to someone else, young or old, that's when we can and should have a reward. Often within schools, rewards are often based on, you've done this really good piece of work, now you get a reward. You've been really good, now you get a reward. But it's really important that it's entrenched within the culture, within the vision. So it's not all segmented and feels like only the adults know the vision and the children know that there's one but don't really know what it is. If you put both together when managing AP, this is how we can create that safe, contained environment for that safe and calm environment for these young people. As they develop, they'll be able to internalize both the restraints associated with consequences and the satisfactions associated with rewards. But it's all feeling based. It's all feeling based. The reason any of us, even as adults, ever want anything is because of the feeling we think we're going to get from it. So if we're wanting something, we're wanting it because we think it's going to make us feel good or feel better. And it's exactly the same for the young people. They need to be able to feel what a reward feels like. So often we have, we're talking about rewards and, don't you want this? Or if you do this, you might miss out on this trip or might not get to go outside or whatever it may be. If that young person never experiences it, they don't know how it feels, so they don't know what they're missing, and they go back into that negative behaviour cycle, the one that often feels way more comfortable for them because it's what they're used to, and they know what to expect from that not so good feeling. So it's crucial when we're thinking about rewards that we supply young people with the experience of the feeling of the reward. And this, of course, will then assist in their learning and development and help them to move away from the vast majority of extrinsic motivations and develop the intrinsic motivation over time. Attachment, so important. I've spoken about it already, but attachment describes that relationship that forms between a young person and their primary caregiver, and it deepens over time through that developing relationship. So again, I've said it already, but really thinking about, do staff really understand attachment, what that means, what that looks like, so on and so forth, how to develop it, different attachment styles, because it's absolutely vital for how that young person will feel about themselves, but also how they view the world. So how they view the school, their perception. Pupils need that secure base to be able to learn and relate, and it's formed via attachments. So again, it's fantastic to have all of these structures in place. But if young people do not feel emotionally safe and contained, it's going to be very difficult for them. And of course, then it's important for safety and stress regulation and resilience. So just very briefly, here are the 4 different attachment styles. Sometimes the middle 2 are called something slightly different, but it's all along the same vein. Most young people attending AP don't necessarily have a secure attachment style. Most of them have an insecure attachment style, which is either avoidant, ambivalent, or disorganized. Young people with a secure attachment, they generally can successfully navigate the world. If there's disappointment, they can kind of bounce back or pick themselves up. And they find it easier to trust others, so easier to make secure attachments with adults, etc., and peers. They're able to soothe their own stress predominantly. Of course, they still need adults to help them to self-regulate, but predominantly they're able to begin to navigate that for themselves. But these young people who have insecure attachments, they do not feel emotionally safe, which is why I keep talking about the importance of emotionally safety. And generally, they feel that people cannot be relied upon. You can have the best staff team in the world, but if a young person has a disorganized attachment, for example, it's going to take some work and some effort within the structure of the school. So all of those elements of the containment puzzle that we've gone through that provide the internal support for the young people, but it's also going to take, as we're talking about this element now, the attachment, for the adults to truly understand what that looks like whilst they're trying to form the attachment. There can be a bit of pushback sometimes, some push and pull, but this is all part of young people who have an insecure attachment style. But when we understand it, we can be consistent in proceeding to meet those needs. They find it very hard to trust others, so it's difficult with their peer relationships as well as relationships with adults. And that bounce back is much more difficult, holding that resentment, holding that feeling of pain and rejection, and then it, of course, coming out maybe as revenge or aggression, etc. So emotional resilience refers to one's ability to adapt to stressful situations or crisis. More resilient people are able to roll with the punches, so to speak, and adapt to adversity without lasting difficulties. Less resilient people have a harder time with stress and life changes, both major and minor. And this is something that Elizabeth Scott quoted. And the reason that I'm sharing this quote is because resilience is formed from secure attachment. So when we are saying we want our young people to be more resilient, it's resilience is formed via secure attachment, and it's not innate. So as they grow, those unmet needs, of course, will arise again and again. So they need to develop that biological and emotional framework for dealing with stress and regulating their emotions. So again, this is why I kept talking about CPD. Do we understand those elements for young people? They really are not, and I know, we know this, but, sharing it with staff, they really are not behaving in a certain way just because. It's much deeper than that. And then, of course, ideally, this will become an independent process over time as they grow, called affect regulation, in which the person has strategies to then meet their own needs without that disproportionate stress levels, which we often see with young people in AP. So here's another training exercise that you can do with your staff team. So going back to that containment puzzle with those 7 elements that we've gone through: the boundaries, expectations, language, attachment, reward, consequence, so on and so forth. Those 7 elements that provide internal emotional safety for young people. Thinking about which element of that containment puzzle do you feel as a school are currently secure, but also how do you know? How do you know they're secure? And then which areas need securing? And that's okay. And there's always going to be something to do. But what can be done to achieve this? And the reason why this is an exercise is because in order for young people to emotionally regulate, they need to have a balance of all of those areas of containment. So you may have a setting where the attachment is amazing within the settings with the adults, but actually the boundaries, a little bit wobbly. And so that young person's still going to be wobbly. All those 7 elements need to balance out consistently and equally in order for the young person to balance out and begin to self-regulate. Behaviour is communication, said it a number of times. So just briefly, let's have a look at behaviour of communication. When you understand that, you no longer see that young person as their behaviour. You no longer say they are not very nice, they are rude and they're horrible. We are saying that behaviour isn't very nice, that behaviour is rude, that behaviour, so on and so forth. But as a young person, like I talked about before, we're separating them from their behaviour, and instead we're able to see them and the undesirable behaviour, and then we're able to say, so what is this behaviour communicating? What is it trying to say? Even some of the most aggressive, ugliest behaviours can be anxiety, stress, dysregulation, so on and so forth. But we're only going to be able to do that if we're able to really understand that behaviour is a communication and separate the young person from the behaviour. And by doing this, you can then contain that young person, emotionally support them consistently to modify their behaviour over time. So just a quick overview. So the external factors in terms of the application of those systems when managing AP, got to have boundaries, expectations, routines, language, consistency. And like we talked about earlier, when thinking about supporting transition and reintegration, mainstream should have the exact same thing: boundaries, expectations, routine, language, and consistency, because what it provides internally for these young people is the emotional safety, security, certainty, support, and stability, but it has to be underpinned by the secure attachments. We talked briefly about the multidisciplinary teams in AP, so it's so important just to emphasise this should involve the parents and professionals, and should be that mixture of competence and expertise. And of course, it sounds really obvious, but it should be about finding resolutions in the best interest of the young people. So who's accountable for what? How are we going to do this individually, but ultimately to support the interests of the young people? Who is assessing, identifying needs? Who are the key professionals? with the expertise and knowledge of how those needs are being met, and how do we put that all together to lead to improved outcomes for the young people in our care. Why do we have multidisciplinary teams in AP? Well, it accelerates progress, meets the varying or complex needs. A crucial point, I keep saying it, but needs. Young people who are acting undesirably is because they have unmet needs, behaviours, communication. We need the multidisciplinary teams to identify those needs and also how to meet those needs. Centralizes information, so all the info in one place and not different teams holding different bits of information. And of course, it then improves the pupils' outcomes. And it also can access financial support, which can be a big hurdle. Special educational needs and diverse disabilities in AP. Really important that we're still within the AP, still when managing AP, we still have interventions, we still got the high expectations, and we still are having adaptations, even though the AP within itself is an intervention in its entirety. But within that, we should have those individual interventions, expectations, and adaptations to meet the needs of the young people. And in conclusion, managing behaviour in AP should be grounded in ABC: attachment, behaviours, communication, and containment, emotional containment. AP should be developing transitional skills for young people to reintegrate back into mainstream school that everyone needs to be aware of, and it should be literally within the systems and structures, just like in that containment puzzle of the school. Multidisciplinary teams, they can improve the outcomes, well, they do improve the outcomes of young people in AP. So what does that look like? Adaptations and interventions should then be supporting those needs, academic and behaviour needs of the young people within AP. An expectation should remain consistent. The variation is in how the expectation will be met, but ultimately expectations should be consistent. So that just leaves me to say thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope it was helpful.